I'm Greg Greenwood and welcome back to my studio. This video is part 2 of my video series on fold forming. In part 1 we learned 3 different basic line folds that are the foundation of the fold forming process. If you missed seeing part 1, I would recommend that you watch that video before you watch this part 2. Here's a link to part 1 and I'll put a link at the end of this video for you also. In this video, we will learn how to wire score straight and curved, anvil score, make pleated folds, make T and wedge T-folds, make cross and wedge cross folds, and make bolt folds. Wow, this is a lot of information. So let's get going and advance your fold forming knowledge. Scoring is extremely important in fold forming to control your folds. I like to use steel binding wire. It's real versatile. I can make it into any shape and I can be very precision with it. I like to lay it on the annealed pieces, tape it down, and then you can force the steel wire into the metal by hammering on it. But this will leave anvil marks on the back of your metal. So I like to turn it over and use my planishing hammer and force the wire into the metal from behind with the planishing hammer. This gives me a sharp score for a very precise fold. After annealing, you can take and fold that right along that scored edge and make a real precision fold. I like to take my planishing hammer and crisp up that fold and then open it up using this very simple circle and one fold, and you can make some really nice interesting forms. Now let's take that simple form and start bending it with our fingers and making it into a more interesting three-dimensional form. Just take and play with it and see what will happen. All of a sudden you end up with a really very interesting 3D form. You're not limited to scoring on just one side of the metal. You can score on opposite sides too. I've already put a straight line down the middle of this circle, and now we'll put our binding wire on the opposite side, planish it down to make some nice deep scores, and then after annealing we can start folding it up and start making those scored lines nice and sharp. All of a sudden it starts taking a nice three-dimensional form. Play with it a little bit and maybe pinch it in a little bit more, and all of a sudden now from that flat circular disc we've got a real nice 3D form. Just by taking those 3 scores, one on one side and 2 on the opposite sides, makes a real nice handsome 3D form. Another way of scoring your metal, making nice straight scores, is to use the edge of your anvil or your bench block. It's really very simple and you can do this on the fly. Simply take your metal, lay it against the edge of the anvil, planishing it down, and it makes a nice deep score. Fold it over and planish it over. Now, you don't always have to be scoring to bend the metal and fold it. Let's do a fold called a pleated fold or a multiple fold. We simply fold it over at random and planish the metal down nice and tight. And so I'm going to just take it at random here and just fold it back and forth. Now after I've folded it, I want to make sure that I do anneal the metal to make it easy to open. I use my knife to open it up because I can get into the nice deep folds. You can use chopsticks or any other tool, but I prefer using my knife because I can get into those folds that are really nice and tight. So simply by using single line folds here and alternating them, making this pleated fold makes a real handsome three-dimensional form. Scoring on the curve can be really fascinating. Take your binding wire, bend it into a nice curve, tape it down, planish it so you get a nice deep score, and make sure that it's annealed, and then simply take it with your fingers and start pushing on it and forming that metal. You'll be surprised how easily this works. Keep pushing it in and forming it with your fingers, and look at, in just a few seconds, we've taken a flat piece of metal and turned it into a real interesting 3D form. Take it even a little bit further. Play with this and see how you like it. It's really a lot of fun with a curved score. Makes a real interesting three-dimensional form. Experiment by mixing the folding techniques that you have learned so far with wire and anvil scoring. You will gain much more control of the folds to make three-dimensional forms that will fit your design ideas. I know you have seen this quick tip in part 1, but it is important to mention it again in this video. After annealing, do not quench your metal in water or pickle. The liquid will get into the folds, and when you start forging, it will spray out all over you and the studio. Air or heat sink cool the metal. Place the metal between the solder block and bench block or 2 bench blocks. It will cool fast and you won't have a mess. The T-fold looks simple enough, and yes it is. But T-folds are the springboard for countless styles of folds. You could spend your entire career exploring T-folds. Let's make a basic T-fold and see how it works. We'll take our metal and chuck it up in the vise like we normally would and flatten it with the rawhide mallet, very similar to what we did with the double line folds. This flat area is called the table of the T-fold. We'll texture this one just for fun. Take our cross-peen hammer and then fold it on out and make those legs into a nice little stand. Let's look at some variations to the T-fold. On this one, you can take one of the edges of the T-fold and flatten it down. This one's been totally flattened. Makes kind of an interesting, subtle look to the metal. This one, let's try making a little kind of a curve in the T-fold. We'll use a mandrel. After it's been annealed, we can roll it up onto the mandrel very easily. This variation has 2 concave areas running perpendicular to the T-fold. This T-fold has been twisted and then flattened down. Notice the single line fold going across perpendicular to it. This T-fold has been made offset and then curled back onto itself. This T-fold has been flared at one end and then pinched down, and then taking a look at the other end, it's been rolled back onto itself, which is kind of an interesting positive negative look for this particular piece. This T-fold has a single and a double line fold running perpendicular across the T-fold. These T-folds have been chased with chasing tools. Air chasing is a fascinating technique in fold forming, which we'll be covering in much more detail in an upcoming video in this series of fold forming. Watch for it. The wedge T-fold is an interesting variation on the T-fold. We put our metal in the vise at a diagonal, hammer it down and planish it nice and smooth, and this leaves us a really nice triangular sharp-edged shape. Here's some variations on the wedge T-fold. This variation on the wedge T-fold is really fun. We slide it into the vise, but we leave the vise a little bit loose, and then you can take your cross-peen hammer and forge down into that table of the wedge T-fold, and makes a real nice sharp geometric look. We can take wedge T-folds and put them back to back each other on the same piece. Slide it in, but use the same piece and flatten it on down, and then you'll end up with a really interesting geometric form. When you're forming the Wedge T-folds, it's a great time to texture them. Let's texture this back to back, and you can see that it's really a nice contrast in the textures. Open it up, handsome piece. This one has a neat little wave in the middle of it from the back to backs. The crossfold is very similar to the triple line fold that we did in the previous video. The difference is that the crossfold has larger tables on it, so we can do a lot more variations to those tables, just like we did with the T-fold. Here's a variation to the crossfold. I've taken the folded edges of the tables and put little mini T-folds in them, which gives it really kind of a real complicated and fun and whimsical look. The wedge crossfold is a real fun fold to make. Take your metal, bend it over, make a nice sharp fold first, put it in the vise, and then open that fold up with the knife. I like to take a plastic mallet and open it up a little bit more. I'm going to tap it with my rawhide to open it up a little more, and then, you've done this before, we'll take the cross peen and start working on either side of that main central fold. This is just like making the triple line fold, only it's much, much thicker, and it's really fun to make. You'll see that it's much more three-dimensional and very, very handsome fold, a wedge crossfold. The wedge crossfold back to back is exciting also. Here's one that's nice and deep, and then here's the back of that, which really is fascinating. Well, look at the backs also. This one's been folded back over on itself, really makes a nice 3D form. The bolt fold. What a beautiful fold this is. Take your metal, bend it over, and put it in the vise at a diagonal. Go halfway up onto the metal. Make sure that the vise is nice and tight. And then take a raising hammer and work from the very point of the fold. And go halfway up onto the fold, forcing the metal down into a nice concave cup. You can see that it's really nice and smooth in there from that raising hammer. Turn it around, and then we'll do the other half. Chuck it up in the vise. I just want to stop it here because I feel this is a beautiful shape here. Go ahead and continue on with your raising hammer and work from the point to the middle. And this will give you a real beautiful curve and a nice concave surface for the bolt fold. This boat fold, I just took the salvage edges and bent them on over onto themselves. Makes kind of a fun little sculpture. You can make variations on this too. This one, I took the salvage edge and did a couple more little bolt folds off of them. This example has 3 boat folds in it, along with some wedge cross folds. I've mixed and matched them. Don't be afraid to do this. This is just a fun project to see how different folds can relate to each other. The more you experiment, the more exciting and the more interesting ideas that you'll come up with. You have learned how to score the metal to achieve better control over the folds, how to make T and cross folds with different variations, and how to make the basic boat fold. By combining these techniques with the line folds that you learned in part 1, you can now make an infinite amount of custom designs that will be unique to your style of jewelry design. Coming up in part 3 of my fold forming series, we will learn fold forging techniques. You won't believe what metal can do with the correct hammer blows. I'm Greg Greenwood. See you then.